Welcome to No Nonsense Nonprofits. Hi, I'm Sandy Ray, founder of Sandra E. Ray, CPA, where we alleviate financial headaches so that you can create a bigger impact. I'm pleased to have with me today David Keterrer. Dave is the president of CD's IT Consulting, which started in 1994. Dave manages a team that works with small businesses, trade associations, and not-for-profit organizations. They provide technological solutions to solve business problems. Prior to starting his own business, Dave was the manager of information systems for the Greater Indianapolis Chamber of Commerce. Dave joined the chamber in 1993 as information systems manager. He directed and educated a staff of 34 individuals in the usage of technology to help them serve the chamber's membership more efficiently. As a native of Cincinnati, Ohio, Dave is a 1989 grad of Purdue University, yay Purdue, with a degree in industrial management and a minor in information systems. Outside of work, Dave enjoys spending time with his family and friends, bowling, golfing, and watching his favorite sports teams. Welcome, Dave. That's quite impressive.
All right. Thanks, Annie. Great to be here.
Well, you have quite a lot of experience with nonprofit organizations, so we're so glad to have you here.
Thank you. We've been working with not-for-profits for probably almost since the start. I started the business back in 1994. It was one of our first clients. It wasn't a not-for-profit C3, it was a C6, but it's still a not-for-profit. So I've been working with them since the beginning.
Wonderful. Now, for our first question for you today, we just want to specifically talk about security threats and nonprofits. How exposed are nonprofits to security threats?
Unfortunately, it doesn't matter how big you are anymore. The threat actors are coming after businesses of all sizes, and especially what's attractive for them from not-for-profits is your list of donors. That's who the end goal is. That's really what they're after, is those people, because they're the ones that have the money that they're going to then try to extract or extort from.
That's a very good point. So what steps should we be taking to minimize these threats?
Things you can do is probably the first thing you'd want to do is provide some sort of security awareness training for all your staff to make them aware, because one of the main paths still for getting into organizations is email phishing attacks. So the more staff are informed of what to look for in those types of emails, to not open, not click on, not open attachments of those types of messages, the better. That's probably one of the first things you can do. Then also equipping every computer in your organization with advanced threat protection, like the next generation antivirus protection is a key, as well as what's called DNS filtering. Basically what that does is keeps your staff from accidentally going to websites that are malicious.
Good point. So for my next question, what should we be addressing in our technology security policy for our small to medium-sized nonprofits?
Probably another main thing they want to do is providing staff with company-owned devices versus using personal devices, especially now with everybody working from home. You want to try to avoid, if not completely avoid, or set a policy that nobody should be using personal laptops or personal desktops to access to your company data, because you don't know what kind of security protection is on those devices. And it could very easily have been compromised. And once they sign into their email or sign into their association management platform or their not-for-profit management platform, or even their shared file system, they could potentially then give the attacker a way to get into their system and steal their information.
Wow, that's scary.
Yeah, unfortunately, it is pretty scary.
Oh, wow. I mean, that really applies to everybody, nonprofit or not nonprofit.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if you're a nonprofit or a for-profit. That's something that you really shouldn't be doing, is allowing your staff to use personal devices.
Okay, and that includes their phones?
The phones are a little bit different. Basically what you need to do is limit of what they're doing with their phones as far as accessing your data, because Apple phones are a little more secure than Android phones. There seems to be more malicious things that are on end up on the Google Play Store versus than the Apple Store. So those are a little bit safer, but try to limit their usage of what they do probably on their phone to just email.
Okay.
So it's limited on what they can do and not be clicking on links. Just back to the security awareness training. If they're not clicking on links on their computer, why should they be doing it on their phone? It's the same situation. They shouldn't do it on either one of them. And if they're getting the training, they should be hopefully more knowledgeable of what to look for and to not be clicking on stuff that place people that are not familiar with sending them stuff.
That's very important, and thank you for that. There's a lot of things there to think about. What about nowadays we hear a lot about cyber security insurance. What is cyber liability insurance, and do we need it?
Cyber liability insurance has changed a lot in the last several years. It used to be fairly simple to get because the insurance companies didn't really understand what all was involved if you had a cyber security incident and had to file a claim against it. Now they're starting to figure out what it is, what it costs. So that's jacking the rates up for cyber insurance. But it is actually very important to get it because if you do have a cyber incident, that your basic business policy has got some minuscule amount, like maybe $10,000 or $20,000, maybe $30,000, which is going to be nowhere near close to covering the cost of a cyber incident because you have more than just the cost of data recovery. You got staff downtime, you've got PR stuff you got to do, you got to pay a forensics company to come in and help clean your stuff up, and that ends up in being very expensive. So most of the time people are recommending at least $1 million of cyber insurance coverage to be able to cover an incident to make sure you cover all your bases to cover all your costs of what potentially you'd have to pay for.
Wow, that does add up. And $1 million, there's no way that most of us could take care of that out of pocket or with what, like you said,
Right.
our liability insurance doesn't cover. Wow, that's a little. I'm going to say it again. It's a little scary. Things we need to be thinking about.
Yeah, it is kind of scary, but I mean, you'd have to talk to your insurance agents and make sure that they're familiar with cybersecurity because not all agents are familiar with what cybersecurity insurance is and is involved in it. So make sure you get in touch with somebody within either your agency or your insurance agent that is familiar with that, or have them find somebody to make sure, tell them what all you got, and they should be able to tell you what would be the best level of coverage for you to get for your size organization.
Well, that's a very good point. Somebody with experience that can help guide us. I like that.
Yeah,
like I'll be calling my agent.
Right, because it may not be $1 million. I may be thinking more for my industry. They tell us to get at least $1 million, but it may be different for a not-for-profit that they may come in at different levels because maybe their exposure is not quite the same, or they're looked at differently by the insurance companies and their underwriters. So that's why I would say just talk to an insurance professional that understands cybersecurity, cyber insurance, and then they should be able to guide you through the process.
So my next question has to do with the risk of, again, a cyber attack, a third party compromising our nonprofits' data security as it relates to the applications that we use with our communications and our fundraising and our electronic data storage. What are some of the things that you recommend to keeping that kind of information safe?
Recommend using strong passwords as well as implementing multi-factor authentication on any of your applications that offer that, which most of them nowadays are for the most part, especially your larger, like your email platforms and your file sharing applications like Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace. They all offer that as a free service that you don't have to pay extra for it. Every license has the ability to turn that on. And most of your better packages for managing your membership or your donors are going to have that capability. Or you can actually, if you have a good enough relationship, when you ask them, say, hey, when you guys going to implement this so we can turn it on ours to protect our data. I mean, that's the first thing you want to have in place. Another thing you want to have, this is from a policy standpoint, you would want to have a plan for what you would do if something does happen. Not necessarily with your infrastructure, but what would happen if something happens with one of your vendors or one of your providers? What is your steps to take to protect your data in that case? Do you have a backup of it? Where is that backup being stored to make sure it's protected from, so if they do happen to get into that vendor's stuff, they will not be able to get to your backup wherever it's stored. So you could potentially get everything back and continue working and not be totally destroyed because you have a third-party vendor that got compromised.
That brings up a great point, because there's a lot of us that have our stuff is cloud-based.
Right. Everything's
backed up.
Right. Yeah. You assume it's backed up. It is not, most likely. It is the vendor's responsibility to provide you infrastructure. It is your responsibility to back up your data.
So we need to be looking to that.
Yeah. If you look at any of their terms of use, you'll find that verbiage somewhere in it that they're not responsible for backing up your data, unless they specifically say that up front or that's part of your contract with them. And some of the smaller like management things, like for your donors or association management stuff, it might include that in their service. But your larger players like Microsoft, Google, Salesforce, they're not going to do that for you. It's up to you to back up your data.
All right. Good to know. I think that's some things that we probably, all of us, ought to be looking into and making sure that that's happening.
Right.
To kind of switch gears a little bit, I hear a lot about PCI compliance when it comes to credit cards and things like that. What is PCI compliance?
That is the banking industry's standard, payment card industry security standards. And basically what that is, it's their set of standards that govern you for accepting and taking credit cards for your organization. So I typically, for the groups, the associations and not-for-profits we work with, that they usually do some sort of audit once a year where they will check their PCI compliance. They'll do a scan on your internal network as well as your website to see if you meet their current compliance standards. And then they'll send you a report back and say, okay, here's what it is and here's what you got to fix. The things that we would be able to help with would be things that are internal to your office environment, work from home environment, and then stuff that's related to your website. You would send that to whoever designs your website to fix whatever issues that come back that say it didn't meet their standards. Okay. And they're pretty strict about that. And the better your score is with them, the lower your rates are going to be with them. So it's important for you to have a better score with them to keep your rates down low, because if you have a little questionable stuff and you're not able to fix it or you don't want to fix it, they're going to charge you a higher rate.
That's a good point. That's a great way to save some money, especially with all of us taking so many electronic payments these days. The credit card processing fees are becoming fairly significant.
Right. Yeah, it can be very, very expensive. If your PCI compliance is on the lower side, they can really nail you for higher fees.
Yeah. We'll have to look at that too. My last question for you today is what are some best practices or tips that you have in addressing cybersecurity issues, especially with people, I think you touched on a little bit earlier, working remotely, either on a regular basis or like a part-time basis, or just things that we ought to be doing?
One of the things you should look at doing is try not to use public Wi-Fi, because that is not very secure because when you connect to public Wi-Fi, your information is not encrypted when you connect to them. So anybody that could be hanging around by could potentially watch your information going through and could potentially steal your information. So public Wi-Fi is not necessarily a good thing. But there is safer ways to use public Wi-Fi. If you have a VPN connection, that will be safer, because then your information is encrypted when you're communicating with whatever you're trying to do. Another thing is have a password manager. That way you don't have to reuse passwords, use the same password or multiple places, because your websites will get hacked. As you see information in the news all the time about that, this website got hacked, that website got hacked. and all this information was stolen. So that information gets on the dark web, and then there people are buying and selling that information and trying to use that to get into your systems to steal money from you or steal your identity. So having a password manager makes it much easier to keep track of. You can have a different password for every website. You let the password manager generate that password for you, so it's really long, and make it difficult for the hacker to get into your system. Because what will happen is the more difficult you make it for them, they're going to give up and move on to the next person. They're going to go for the one that has the lowest hanging fruit is what they're going for. So whatever's the easiest way for them to get in, that's what they're going to do. So you got to make it as hard as possible to make yourself a target. And then that way they'll move on to the next place.
Well, that's good to know.
I mean, those are the two main things. Make sure you install updates on your computer for whether it's Windows or Mac. Macs are not immune to viruses, even though a lot of people still think they are. That is not the case, especially now there's more and more Mac exploits out in the wild now. So it's important that you patch both Macs and Windows, as well as the actual individual applications that are on, like Microsoft Office, Adobe Acrobat, Chrome, Firefox. Make sure all those programs are up to date, because those vendors are always putting out updates to keep their products as secure as possible.
Wonderful. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. Dave, I want to thank you for joining us today. I hope you're willing to come back and share more information, and just want to thank you for sharing your expertise with everyone. I think this is something that's very important to all of us. And
oh, great. Yeah, thanks. It was my pleasure being here, Sandy. Appreciate it.
I also want to thank everyone for listening today and joining us. And remember that creating a bigger impact starts with stopping the nonsense. And if you're dealing with nonsense in your nonprofit organization, we'd love to help you cut through the noise.